In a world packed with strict laws against crimes like gambling, there is this country where gambling is not only allowed, but is the largest business in the state. You heard me right. It might astonish you that the state is part of South China. China, where if you gamble and get caught in the hands of the law, you will have to pay a strict fine of $90,000 with an imprisonment of 3 years. Then why is this state so open to the serial crime of gambling? What is the history of this state? And if it's a part of China, then why China doesn't interfere with police and laws of Macau? Let's try to find out in this video. But before we move on, show some love by subscribing to the channel. Also, don't forget to press the bell icon to receive all the updates at the earliest. Without further suspense, let's get into it. Macau is a tiny peninsula located in the south of China. Although there is not much difference between the maps of China and Macau, it is a totally independent state with its own laws and policies. As a separate state with its government, money, and police, it requires the proper documentation and passports to fly from China to Macau or Macau to China. And this is because Macau is one of the 2 special administrative regions of China, with the other state being Hong Kong. Both regions run their systems by their own rules and regulations without interference from Beijing or mainland China. Hong Kong, however, sometimes takes influence from mainland China, such as making Disneylands, skyscrapers with millions of people, and more. Likewise, Macau has the spotlight, but in a far different way: the gambling. The significance of gambling industry in Macau. Gambling is legal and justified inside the territories of the tiny Macau. The state has its own government and rules that make gambling legal to play openly in the casinos. Hong Kong does have some betting on horse rides and lotteries, but the state does not have a single casino where gamblers can play the games lawfully. Macau, on the other hand, is going crazy, with more than 50 casinos all over the state and a population of 704,149 people as of 2023. It means that where gambling is restricted for the 1.4 billion population in China, which makes up 18% of the world, it is legal for such a tiny region like Macau. Other states around Macau, like Vietnam, Taiwan, and Japan, also have strict punishments against gambling activities, and they have no casinos there. But the question is, despite the fact that gambling is legal and restricted in a large territory like China, why does Macau's government not take any action against it? Because at the end of the day, it is still a crime. Why gambling is not a crime in Macau? The major reason why gambling is not a crime in Macau is because it benefits the state as well as the people living there, and this benefit is over all the businesses happening in Macau. Permission to do gambling legally makes Macau one of the most internationally visited states, with 31 million people visiting Macau in 2016 alone, which counts nearly 85,000 tourists every day. Now, tourists play a vital part in making the revenue of this country, and fortunately, Macau has an edge over it. Macau, a tiny state, manages to generate more dollars for its tourist revenue than the overall tourism industry in Japan. Not only that, the region's gambling industry is several times larger than the economy of Las Vegas. All these things, the small population, developed areas, and tourist attractions towards gambling, make the state the largest profitable gambling center. Now, hold your breath, because I'm about to tell you something that will utterly blow your mind. Macau's casinos generated over $36 billion in revenue for the state in 2019. This shocking revenue makes up a straight half of Macau's total GDP. On the other hand, the gambling revenue in Las Vegas was merely $12 billion. Moreover, the casinos in Macau employ 17% of the total population, which also helped people overcome unemployment. However, the actual benefit goes to the casino owners and the government of Macau, which receives immense support and money from the gambling industry alone. The COVID-19 period was challenging for Macau, but the state managed to hit a revenue of $2 billion right after the uplifting of pandemic restrictions in August 2020. Although the revenue was not near what it was in 2019, it still overtook the gambling revenue of $1.2 billion in Las Vegas. Presently, the gambling industry is even stronger than in the past. It just keeps expanding and generating handsome money for the locals and tourists. But in Macau, it wasn't always the same. Let's go back in time when gambling was strictly prohibited in Macau, and then later became legal. The origins of gambling industry in Macau. In the early 1500s, Macau emerged as a trading port under the Chinese government, drawing Portuguese traders who entered the region for commercial activities. They even began renting the area from the Chinese government until the 1800s, when the British showed up in the nearby state of Hong Kong. Soon, they made the Chinese addicted to opium to generate some money, which was no less a sign of trouble for the Portuguese settled in Macau. That was when they refused to pay the rent and signed a contract with the Chinese dynasty to occupy Macau permanently. However, the arrival of British people in Hong Kong caused a diminishing of the port trade of Macau and affected the state's economy. That was where gambling entered the scene. The Portuguese decided to legalize gambling to increase the local government's revenue. Initially, it was simple, and the gambling included only traditional Chinese houses. However, the turning point came in 1930 when Macau's government granted monopoly rights to the official gambling industry. But this plan took an unexpected turn as World War II unfolded shortly. During World War II, Japan occupied the whole of China, leaving Macau untouched. Thanks to them for not doing any harm to the tiny state that was being called a haven during the entire war. Soon, many refugees started entering in Macau to save their life, and Macau welcomed them with warmth. With such a massive workforce, the economy of the tiny region started booming. In the 1960s, Macau decided to hand over gambling rights to different companies called STDM. The company introduced a Western-style monopoly in the casinos and investment in marine transport so that the British people from Hong Kong could come to Macau for gambling purposes. Although Macau was then the permanent property of the Portuguese, they were forced to leave the state. Macau gambling industry under the governance of Chinese government. In 1997, the British handed Hong Kong back to the Chinese government as they promised to return the state in 100 years since 1896. Initially, the Portuguese didn't agree to return the region to the Chinese government, according to the treaty they signed with the dynasty. However, the People's Republic of China wasn't in the mood to listen to them, and with billions of populations and millions of soldiers, they had the power to make them go. With zero options, the Portuguese peacefully handed over the state of Macau to the Chinese government in 1999. However, the Chinese government decided not to interfere in Macau's gambling policies and casinos. The state was already on the edge of an economic crisis during the transfer years. Though a large portion of the state's economy always depended upon gambling, it couldn't be banned at the worst time of the state's financial position. The STDM ended in 2002, and many new gambling organizations started operating in Macau free of Portuguese law. The state won the reputation of the world's capital gambling hub by 2007 with more revenue than Las Vegas. But now, the increasing taxes of Macau's present-time gambling industry have already become problematic for the state's economy. As of 2019, Macau's gambling industry taxes made up a whopping 70% of the total government income, which is alarming for the coming economic downfall of the state. As the Chinese government decided not to interfere in the laws of Hong Kong and Macau for 50 years. So, until 2047 for Hong Kong and 2049 for Macau, China is not going to make any changes to the laws of the states. However, by the end of this period, the booming gambling industry in Macau might be at risk of destruction. What is your take on the future of Macau's gambling industry? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.